Hi everyone, welcome to Painted Textures. For today's tutorial I will be working in Photoshop. I want to show you how to turn your photos into a pastel painting, pencil drawing, or pen and ink. I'm going to be using three textures. The first one is Tuscan Pastel from the Italian collection, the second is Cat Scratch, and the third is Black and White Chalk, both of them from the Graphic Arts collection. The first photo we're going to work on is this one here of these two little girls. And I would like to turn this photo into a pastel painting using the Tuscan Pastel texture over here. Now what I'd like to do before I do any texturing work is I like to what I call level the playing field. This photo has been edited and sharpened to present to the client, and it is done as far as I'm concerned. But if I'm going to add a texture, I want to change things up a bit. I want to reduce the contrast between the light and the dark areas in the photo. So the first thing I'm going to do is just lighten the dark areas very subtly, and then I'm going to darken the whole photo in general because I want to get it to be ready for a texture to be placed over it. Textures will automatically create contrast. They will automatically lighten a photo and they will lend their own colors to a photo. So if the photo is already correct exposure-wise, sometimes it actually needs to be darkened. So let's do step one first. We're going to lighten the shadows a bit, and all I do is I go to my layers palette, do Command J, and I get a new layer from the background layer, and I'm going to use the blend mode screen, which as you can see really lightens things up. Pull back a little bit, and I really only want the lightening where the shadows are. So I'm going to put a mask on that layer, but I'm going to do a reverse mask. I'm going to use a black mask and only paint in where I want that lightening to be. To do this, you have to press Alt or Option on your keyboard, and while holding that down, you press this little mask button over here, and you'll get a nice black mask. Now I need a brush, so you press B for brush, and right away your brush tool comes up, and you want, in your drop down menu, you want to choose a nice soft brush like this, and you can change the size of that brush by hitting the right bracket key, which enlarges it, and the left bracket key will make it smaller. Make sure that the color picker over here shows white for the foreground color. If you don't have that, you just click on these two little tiny squares and they should come back up. They switch back and forth by clicking on these arrows like this. So we have white and we have our brush and we're ready to go. And I'm at 47% of my brush, but I'm going to bring it up to 100% so I can show you just how this lightens the dark areas like this, maybe the side of her face, a little bit like that, a little bit on her skirt. And you can, I have this layer now, its opacity is 34%. You can increase the intensity of this adjustment by raising the percentage. As you can see, it really intensifies it too much. So I'm just going to bring it down to maybe get a little bit of her nose there. That looks about right. Now, remember, we're really going to create a painting in certain respects. So it doesn't have to be perfect, and it's definitely not going to look like a photograph, something that we would present as a photograph in itself. So now we're going to collapse those layers, go up to your layers palette, go down to merge visible, and now I'm going to do a levels layer. Go up to layers, new adjustment layer, levels, and I like to use this a lot for darkening and lightening and punching up photos. And I'm just going to take that middle slider and move it to the right and just darken my photo a little bit like that, which would be too dark for me if I were just presenting the photo as is. but I'm going to keep it like this for texture work. Go up to layers, merge visible, and now you have your photo that's ready for a texture. So here we go. We take our texture. Oops. Let's see, I want to make sure you can see both of them. We're going to take the move tool up here in your toolbox and just slide this texture right over like this. And at this point it's completely covering the photo, so we go up to our blend mode and let's try overlay. And that's pretty intense. Bring back the opacity a little bit. Let's try soft light, which is a lot nicer in this particular situation. Now, this is pretty much where I want it, but I might want to remove some of the texture on the face. And I'm going to show you how to do this, but you need to be very careful because, again, we don't want this to look like a photo. We want it to look like a pastel painting, so you don't completely want to remove that pastel texture from the face. You want to remove it just ever so slightly so that we can see into the face, but we also do not want the look of a photo peering out of a painting. Now this is how we do it. We go back up. We know we're going to use soft light. I think I'm going to choose the blend mode soft light. I like the way that looks. But you go back up for the moment to the blend mode normal and all the way up to 100% so you can see the colors in your texture. You go over to your color picker here and you just click on a color that's representative of this texture that might be nice to go over onto the photo. So let's try this. We might have to experiment a little bit. Go back down to soft light and pick B for brush. And now we're going to change the brush opacity because I just want to carefully paint away some of that texture. Now, why did I choose a color brush? Because textures also impart color. If I were to just wipe this texture away, you'd see the color of her skin come through from the original photo, and it would not look like it was part of the picture. So we have to stay within the color guidelines of the texture that we're applying. So I'm just going to wipe it away a little bit. Careful, careful. Just a little bit. And I think the baby is fine. And we're done. And that's all there is to it. And seal it up, go to layers, merge visible, and there you have your image. Now we're going to take this photo and turn it into a pencil drawing. And the first thing I'm going to do is put this basic texture on top of the photo. This is fresco from the Italian collection, and I find that basic textures are very good for, again, reducing the contrast between light and dark in the photo and preparing it for the heavier textures. So we're going to use our move tool and drag and drop this texture. Let's minimize that. Use your bounding box handles there and just drag them into position. And when you get the texture placed to just about where you want it, you press the return or enter key to seal in the transformation. This is very important because otherwise your texture will not stay in place. Now we're going to go over here to the layers palette and we're going to choose multiply as a blend mode. Reduce the opacity a little bit, and as you can see right away, that reduces the contrast between the lights and the darks in the photograph and gets it ready for the next texture. I'm not going to merge my layers because in this case I want to see all of the layers so that I can play around with the opacities and push and pull them until I get the photo to look the way I want it to look. It's kind of like keeping all of your paints out on the table. Okay, so now I'm going to use this cat scratch texture and drag and drop that across the photo as well. And as you can see, I also have little bounding boxes here, and don't have to be overly careful as to where you place this because it's basically a uniform texture. Press the enter or return key. And now let's look at the blending modes for this. First, let's start with overlay. And I think that's a little too intense, and so I pull back the opacity, but I still don't really care for that. So I'm going to go to soft light, and that's a lot more of what I'm looking for. I also like the fact that it's placed very softly over the face. It's not too intense. And again, here I can play around with the opacity of the layers. I can go back to layer 1 and go back on the opacity, or I can increase the opacity and go back to layer 2, increase the opacity, or bring it back. And so I think I'm going to stick with that. Now, again, you have the option of removing some of the texture from the face. In this case, I'm going to leave it because I really do want this photo to look more like a pencil drawing and less like a photograph. So maybe pull back a little bit and we are done. And then I will go up to Layers Palette, press Layers and go down to Merge Visible to collapse all the layers, and there we have our pencil drawing. Okay, now we're going to give this photo here the look of a pen and ink drawing or an etching. This was taken in Virginia at Washington's estate, Mount Vernon, and while we were on vacation, and I have turned it into a black and white and sharpened it, and it's ready to go. And I'm going to be using black and white chalk, one of my very favorite textures from the Graphic Arts collection. I love this texture. It's extremely versatile. It can create some amazing effects. It can give a photo the look of a black and white chalk drawing or a pen and ink or an etching. So we're going to use this. We grab our move tool and we just drag and drop it across the photo. Let's minimize that. Use your bounding boxes to adjust the size of the texture, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And then press Return or Enter to seal the transformation. This is really important because if you don't do that, this texture could move around, and 2, you won't be able to do any other steps. So you have to seal that transformation in. Now we go over to our blending modes here, and I think I'm just going to start with overlay, which looks pretty good to me. And if you notice, this time I did not lighten the areas of the photo that were dark first to kind of even out the contrast between lights and darks like I did with the other 2 photos. Because with this texture, I wanted to see what effect it would produce before I did that, so now I can selectively go over different areas and lighten them. And I really kind of like the way that looks at 100%, so I'm going to leave that, go up to my Layers menu here, go down to Merge Visible. And now I'm going to add another layer by pressing Command J, which duplicates the background layer. And I'm going to lighten up some of these areas by choosing the Blend Mode Screen, which automatically lightens everything, reducing the opacity a little bit. And now I only want to selectively lighten areas, so I'm going to put a mask on that layer by pressing this little mask button here and selectively painting in the areas that I want lightened. But I don't want to use a white mask, I want to use a black mask, which allows me to only paint in the adjustment in certain areas. And to do that, I have to press the Alt key, and while holding the Alt key down, I press this little mask button to get a black mask. Press B for your brush tool, and you should have a nice soft brush chosen up here. And now I'm going to, touching on my mask and making sure I'm working on the mask, and at 100% opacity of my brush, I'm going to selectively lighten certain areas of this photo. Again, you can enlarge your brush, you can decrease the size of it by using your bracket keys. And it's looking more like an etching already, because etchings and pen and ink drawings are very subjective. Um, they're not 100% accurate like photographs are. So they tend to have lighter areas and darker areas where photographs would not. And that's why when you lighten up some of these areas, it looks more and more like a pen and ink drawing, as if somebody had drawn it. Okay, I kind of like that. Again, doesn't have to be perfect because we're actually making a little drawing here. And drawings are, for the most part, never perfect. Okay. And as you can see, aside from the fact that we're using a texture, we're actually painting with light. So don't get nervous about this part. Paint away. Enjoy yourself. Okay, I kind of like that. I'm going to leave it. And now I'm just going to go up to my layers menu, go down and merge visible. Now one last step is I might add a little bit of sharpening to this photo. Even though I sharpened it ahead of time, when you apply a texture, it kind of dulls the photo a little bit, so you might have to add another level of sharpening. So I'm going to press Command J to get a new layer going there, and then I'm going to go up to my filter menu and go down to Other and choose High Pass. And this is another way to sharpen. I usually use unsharp mask, but I like this high pass sharpening method because it picks out the edges. And I have radius 7.4, press OK. And now in the blending mode, you see everything is grayed out. In the blending mode, choose Overlay, and suddenly you have a sharpened photo. You can pull this back a little bit, but I think that looks very nice. So I'm going to go up to the Layers menu and Merge Visible, and you have a nice little etching of Mount Vernon.